The imperial throne room of Selvaria Prime shimmered with golden lights, its towering pillars glowing with an energy older than the stars. At the center of the chamber sat King Valor, ruler of the Selvarian Empire, his expression as unshakable as a mountain. Before him stood his three daughters, Princess Dyra, Princess Valara, and Princess Ceres, each one proud, intelligent, and utterly furious. "Father, you cannot be serious," Dyra said, her voice like a blade cutting through the silence. "I am." The king's deep voice carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "The Empire stands at a crossroads. We cannot afford division, nor can we fight on all sides. Earth is rising in power, and a bond with them will bring stability." Valara folded her arms. "And your answer is to marry us off to some human." Her tone was icy, measured. "This is a desperate move, even for you." The youngest, Ceres, bit her lip but said nothing. She had always been the most curious among them, yet even she looked uneasy. The doors of the chamber opened with a deep hum, and in stepped a single man, Captain Adrian Cross. He was human. That much was obvious. His uniform was simple compared to the elaborate robes of the court, but he walked with the confidence of someone who had seen war and survived it. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, his posture relaxed but not disrespectful. A scar ran along his jaw, a reminder of battles fought on distant worlds. He was no politician, no noble, but a soldier. The princesses stared at him. He met their gazes, unflinching. Adrian wasn't happy about this arrangement either. He hadn't come here for love, nor to play some royal game. Earth's government had chosen him, the hero they didn't want but couldn't ignore, as a symbol of unity. It was politics, nothing more. "I assume you are the man chosen to be our husband?" Valara asked, her words laced with disdain. Adrian gave a half smirk. "I assume you are the women chosen to be my wives." His tone was polite, but there was a spark of defiance in his voice. Dyra stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Do you even know what you're getting into, human?" He didn't look away. "I know enough." The room grew tense. The Selvarian nobles who had gathered to watch this meeting murmured amongst themselves. A human standing before royalty like an equal, it was unheard of. King Valor studied Adrian closely. "Tell me, Captain, do you reject my decree?" Adrian took a deep breath. "I won't pretend I agree with it, but I won't insult you by refusing outright. If we're to do this, I have terms too." Dyra scoffed. "You dare make demands?" "I dare to not be a pawn," Adrian replied, his voice steady. He turned to the king. "I will not stand here and be paraded around like some trophy. If this marriage is to happen, I want to earn my place, not be handed it." There was a flicker of something in Valara's sharp eyes. Interest, amusement. King Valor stroked his beard. "You wish to prove yourself?" "I do." The king's lips curled into something dangerously close to a smile. "Then you shall. In 3 days, you will face the trials of the chosen. If you fail, you will be sent back to Earth in disgrace." Adrian nodded. "Sounds fair." Ceres, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but there was a spark of curiosity in her tone. "And if you succeed?" Adrian exhaled, glancing at the 3 alien princesses who were now, apparently, his potential wives. "If I succeed," he said, "then maybe, just maybe, this won't be a mistake after all." 3 days passed faster than Adrian Cross would have liked. The sun of Selvaria Prime hung high above the arena of proving, a massive coliseum carved from obsidian stone. Thousands of Selvarian spectators filled the towering seats, their voices merging into a low hum of anticipation. In the center of the arena, Adrian stood alone, his muscles tense as he surveyed the battlefield before him. He wasn't afraid. He had survived war zones and impossible odds before, but this was different. This was their test, their world, and he was playing by their rules. Up in the royal balcony, King Valor sat with his daughters. Princess Dyra leaned forward, watching Adrian with sharp, analytical eyes. Valara crossed her arms, unimpressed. Ceres, however, looked thoughtful. "Are you sure he'll survive this?" Ceres asked. Dyra smirked. "I think the better question is, how long before he begs for mercy?" The king stood, raising a hand. The arena fell silent. Captain Adrian Cross, you stand before the people of Selvaria, an outsider seeking to claim what belongs to us. You will now face the trials of the chosen. Survive, and you earn your place. Fail, and you leave in disgrace. Adrian rolled his shoulders. Let's get on with it. A deep rumble shook the ground as a massive steel gate at the far end of the arena slowly began to rise. From the darkness beyond, something moved, something big. The crowd erupted into cheers as a six-legged beast stomped into the arena, its armor like scales glistening under the alien sun. Its four glowing eyes locked onto Adrian, and with a deafening roar, it charged. Adrian dodged at the last second, rolling to the side as the ground shook beneath the monster's weight. He drew his energy blade, its blue light humming to life. The creature turned, faster than something its size should have been, and swiped at him with a massive claw. Adrian ducked, barely. He struck out, his blade cutting deep into the creature's leg. No effect. From the royal balcony, Valara scoffed. Pathetic. He'll be crushed in seconds. Cirrus frowned. He's still standing. Adrian wasn't done yet. He studied the beast, noting the gaps between its armored plates. That was his opening. The creature lunged again. This time, instead of dodging, Adrian charged forward, sliding under its belly and driving his blade between two armor plates. The beast roared in pain, its massive frame shaking violently. The crowd gasped. Syra's eyes widened slightly. Clever. The beast staggered, but it wasn't finished. It spun, tail whipping toward Adrian like a battering ram. He had no time to dodge. Instead, he braced himself and jumped, using the momentum to land on the beast's back. With a swift motion, he drove his blade deep into its spine. The creature let out a final pained roar before collapsing onto the sand. A heavy silence filled the arena. Then, cheers. Adrian, breathing hard, pulled his blade free and turned to face the royal balcony. His gaze locked onto King Valar. Well, Adrian called, that good enough for you? The king stroked his beard, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. The first trial is complete. Adrian exhaled, rolling his shoulders. First. Valara smirked. This is going to be fun. Cirrus, for the first time, smiled. Zyra watched Adrian closely. He wasn't just surviving, he was adapting, and that made him dangerous. Adrian stood in the center of the grand arena, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The beast's massive form lay still behind him, its armored hide smeared with sand and blood. The cheers from the crowd still echoed in his ears, but he knew better than to relax. The king's voice rang out once more. The first trial tested your strength, the second will test your mind. Adrian wiped sweat from his brow. Great. Let's see what you've got. The ground beneath him rumbled. The sand shifted, moving as if it were alive. Adrian stepped back, hand tightening around the hilt of his energy blade, but before he could react, the floor dropped away beneath him. He fell. Darkness swallowed him whole. Then, light. Adrian landed with a grunt on solid stone. He pushed himself up, shaking his head. He was no longer in the arena. He stood in a vast chamber, walls lined with glowing symbols. The air felt heavy, charged with energy. A massive door loomed ahead, covered in intricate carvings. A voice echoed in the chamber. Cirrus, this is the trial of the mind. If you wish to continue, you must solve the puzzle before you. Fail, and you will be trapped in this chamber forever. Great, Adrian muttered. No pressure. He approached the glowing door, studying the carvings. The symbols looked similar to the ones he had seen on the Selvarian palace walls, but something was off. Certain pieces were missing. Then he saw them. Floating stone tablets hovered in the air, each etched with a different symbol. Adrian quickly understood. He had to place the correct symbols into the empty spaces on the door. Easy, right? He reached for the first tablet, examining its markings. It resembled a constellation he had seen before. Maybe it was a star map. He scanned the door, searching for a match. Minutes passed. His mind worked furiously, connecting patterns, recalling details he had barely noticed in the palace. The air around him grew hotter. the chamber walls pulsing with a faint red glow. A warning. He had limited time. His fingers hovered over a tablet. This has to be it. He pressed it into the door. The stone rumbled, the symbol glowed, but then flickered and vanished. Wrong choice. The walls shook, the ground beneath him cracked. "Damn it," Adrian muttered. He tried again, his heartbeat quickening. This time, he focused on the sequence of the symbols rather than their individual meanings. Then it clicked. He grabbed 2 tablets at once and pressed them in simultaneously. The door pulsed bright blue. A deep mechanical click echoed through the chamber. The rumbling stopped. Adrian exhaled in relief as the door slid open. He stepped forward into another chamber, this one smaller, silent. And he was not alone. A figure stood waiting for him. Princess Xyra. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. The air between them was charged, though Adrian wasn't sure why. "You did better than expected," she admitted. Adrian smirked. "Is that your way of saying you're impressed?" Xyra tilted her head slightly. "Not yet." She stepped forward. "There is one final test, one that no outsider has ever passed." Adrian's smirk faded. "Let me guess, it's not going to be easy." Xyra held his gaze. "No, and it's not something you can fight your way through." Her voice was quiet, almost personal. Adrian felt something shift between them, something neither of them was ready to name. And for the first time since arriving on Selvaria, he realized this was more than just survival. It was a game of fate, and he was already deeply involved. Adrian followed Xyra through a long, dimly lit corridor. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of something unfamiliar, like energy itself had a presence. He could feel the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just another test. This trial, Adrian spoke, his voice steady. "What is it really about?" Xyra didn't look back as she answered. "It is the test of the soul. Strength and intelligence mean nothing if your heart is weak." Adrian let out a short breath. "You sure know how to keep things dramatic." A small, almost amused look crossed Xyra's face, but she said nothing. They stepped into a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling stretched high, its surface covered in swirling patterns of light. In the center of the room stood an ancient pedestal, and upon it rested a glowing sphere. It pulsed softly, like a living heartbeat. Ceres's voice filled the chamber, though she was nowhere to be seen. "Adrian, you will face the orb of truth. It will look into your soul, revealing your deepest fear. You must overcome what it shows you, or it will break you." Adrian felt an uneasy knot form in his stomach. Fantastic. More nightmare fuel. Xyra's expression was unreadable, but her voice was softer than before. "You don't have to do this." Adrian looked at her, surprised. There was something behind her words, something real. "You know I can't walk away," he said. A long pause. Then she nodded. He stepped toward the pedestal. The orb pulsed brighter as he reached for it. The moment his fingertips touched its surface, a shock of cold ran through his body. His vision blurred. The chamber vanished. Suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. Darkness. Silence. Then, screaming. Adrian's eyes widened as he found himself standing in the wreckage of a battlefield. The ground was covered in rubble, twisted metal, and broken machines. Smoke rose from burning wreckage. His heart pounded. He knew this place. It was Earth, or what was left of it. He turned, scanning the ruins. Bodies lay scattered. Some were human, some were alien, all of them lifeless. He heard a voice, weak, struggling. He spun around and saw his father. The man lay on the ground, blood staining his uniform. His breathing was ragged. His eyes met Adrian's, filled with pain and something worse, disappointment. "You failed," the older man whispered. Adrian froze. The word hit him harder than any blow. He took a step forward, but his father's face darkened. "You should have been stronger, smarter. You could have saved us." Adrian's breath caught. A shadow loomed behind him. A reflection. He turned and stared at himself. But this version of him was different. Colder, crueler. His reflection smirked, eyes gleaming with something inhuman. "You don't belong here," it whispered. "You're just pretending." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. No, his voice came out steady, strong. He wasn't a failure. He wasn't weak. And he would never become the man standing before him. His reflection lunged. Adrian didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward. Through the fear, through the doubt, straight into the heart of it. The vision shattered. The chamber returned. Adrian staggered back, gasping for air. The orb was dark now, its energy spent. He had passed. A hand touched his arm. Zaira. She was close, her voice low. You saw something painful, didn't you? Adrian nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah, but I won. She studied him for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. A real smile. Cyrus's voice echoed once more. The trials are complete. Adrian, you have proven yourself worthy. Adrian exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Finally, does this mean I get a break now? Zaira's smile turned sly. Not quite. There's still the matter of the royal decision. He frowned. And what's that? Zaira tilted her head. Whether or not I choose you. Adrian blinked. Wait. What? Her gaze lingered on him for a second longer than necessary. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her voice carrying over her shoulder. Come. The king is waiting. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Something told him his trials weren't over yet. Adrian followed Zaira through the towering golden doors, stepping into a grand hall unlike anything he had ever seen. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, adorned with glowing constellations that shifted and moved as if alive. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, reflecting off the smooth, polished floor beneath his boots. At the far end of the hall, seated on an ornate throne, was King Valzar. His presence alone commanded silence. His piercing gaze settled on Adrian, unreadable yet intense. Beside him, Princess Ceres stood tall and regal, her hands folded neatly in front of her. To her right, Zaira took her place, her expression neutral. Adrian cleared his throat. So, this is the part where you tell me if I passed, right? The king leaned forward slightly. You have endured the trials, but now comes the true test, our choice. Ceres spoke next, her voice cool and measured. Our father gave us the right to decide if you are worthy. If we do not accept you, then all of this was for nothing. Adrian exhaled. No pressure, huh? Zaira shot him a brief glance but said nothing. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, King Valzar stood. His towering figure cast a shadow over the hall as he descended from the throne, each step deliberate. You are strong, Adrian, the king said, his deep voice echoing. You have courage, intelligence, and most importantly, you do not break under fear. Adrian met his gaze head-on. But strength alone does not decide this matter. Valzar continued. It is their choice. The king turned to Ceres first. Do you accept him? Ceres regarded Adrian carefully, her expression unreadable. He has proven himself, she admitted. He is not what I expected. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she nodded. Yes, I accept him. Adrian felt a small weight lift from his chest, but he wasn't out of danger yet. Valzar turned to Zaira. And you? Zaira's eyes met Adrian's. A strange tension filled the space between them. Unlike Ceres, she hesitated. The silence stretched. Adrian swallowed. Zaira? Her expression was unreadable, but then, finally, she spoke. I accept him. Something in her voice was different, a quiet certainty. The king nodded. Then it is decided. A sigh of relief nearly escaped Adrian, but before he could relax, Valzar's expression darkened slightly. But there is one last matter. Adrian tensed. Of course there is. The king stepped closer. This was not just a test for you, Adrian. It was also a test for my daughters. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? Valzar's gaze sharpened. The one who chooses you must prove her choice. Adrian blinked. Okay, and how exactly does that? Before he could finish, Zaira took a step forward. She turned to her father. I will prove it. Adrian looked at her, confused. Prove what? Zaira didn't answer. Instead, she moved closer, much closer. Adrian barely had time to react before her hand touched his chest, and in a single, smooth motion, she leaned in, her lips brushing his in a brief but firm kiss. His breath caught. The entire hall fell silent. When she pulled back, her expression was calm, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet challenge. "I stand by my choice," she said. King Valzar studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then it is settled." Sarah smirked slightly but said nothing. Adrian was still processing what just happened. His heart was definitely beating faster than normal. Zyra turned to him. "You should rest. Tomorrow, everything changes." Adrian exhaled. Right, because today was totally normal. A small smile flickered at the corner of her lips. And as he followed them out of the grand hall, one thought echoed in his mind. What exactly had he just gotten himself into? Adrian lay awake in the massive chamber he had been given, staring up at the glowing ceiling. The patterns above him swirled like distant galaxies, beautiful yet unfamiliar. Everything around him was still so strange. The towering halls, the floating lights, the quiet hum of the palace walls. But the strangest thing. Zyra had kissed him. His fingers brushed his lips as he tried to process it. It had been unexpected. But it wasn't just for show. There had been something real in that moment. And that made things even more confusing. Before he could dwell on it any longer, a soft chime echoed in the room. The doors slid open, and Sarah stepped inside, her gaze sharp yet unreadable. "You're still awake," she observed. Adrian sat up. "Hard to sleep when I don't know if I'll wake up to another crazy challenge." Sarah gave a small smirk and crossed the room, sitting gracefully in a chair near the window. "No more trials. You are one of us now, but that does not mean life will be easy." Adrian let out a breath. "Yeah, I figured." He glanced at her. "So, Zyra's choice, that wasn't just for some royal tradition, was it?" Sarah studied him for a moment before shaking her head. "No, it was her way of proving she was serious. Our father does not tolerate hesitation. When we choose something, we must stand by it completely." Adrian swallowed. "Right, no pressure." Sarah tilted her head. "And you? Do you accept your place here?" Adrian hesitated. "It's not like I have a lot of options." She frowned. "That is not an answer." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I didn't plan any of this. But if I have to be here, I'd rather have a real reason, not just because someone told me I had to." Sarah studied him, then nodded. "Fair enough." Before she could say more, a new voice entered the room. "You're not giving him a hard time, are you?" Adrian turned to see Zyra standing in the doorway, her arms folded. There was something relaxed about her posture, but her gaze was locked onto Sarah's with quiet amusement. Sarah stood. "I was making sure he understands the situation." Zyra raised an eyebrow, and Sarah glanced at Adrian. "He understands, somewhat." Adrian rolled his eyes. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." Sarah smirked slightly, then turned toward the door. "Rest while you can. The real challenges come after sunrise." With that, she disappeared into the hallway, leaving Zyra and Adrian alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, Zyra exhaled. "She's right, you know." Adrian leaned back against the pillows. "Yeah, I'm getting that a lot." Zyra walked further into the room, stopping near the foot of his bed. "Things will move quickly from here. Our people will want to see you. Some will accept you, some will not. And there will be those who resist this entirely." Adrian frowned. "Resist? What do you mean?" Zyra's expression darkened slightly. "Not everyone agrees with my father's decision to bring a human into our bloodline. Some believe it weakens our people." Adrian let that sink in. "Great, so I have to win over an entire kingdom that doesn't even want me here." Zyra smirked. "Something like that." Adrian sighed. "No pressure, huh?" She took a step closer, her gaze steady. "I chose you, Adrian. That means I will stand by you, no matter what." Adrian met her eyes, surprised by the weight of her words. There was no hesitation, no doubt. For the first time since arriving here, he didn't feel like an outsider. "Thanks, Zyra." She nodded. "Get some sleep. You'll need it." As she turned to leave, Adrian called out, "Hey." She paused at the door. He hesitated for a moment, then gave a small grin. "You know, for a first kiss, that was pretty bold." Zyra smirked. "Who said it was the last?" And with that she was gone, leaving Adrian with a heart that wouldn't stop racing. Tomorrow, everything would change, and he wasn't sure if he was ready. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the palace, its light filtering through the grand windows of Adrian's chamber. He stood near the balcony, gazing out at the sprawling alien city below. It was breathtaking. Tall structures that shimmered like crystal, roads that curved smoothly through the landscape, and floating platforms carrying people through the sky. For a moment, he let himself appreciate the beauty of it. But then reality settled in. Today, he had to face the kingdom. A sharp knock on the door made him turn. Before he could answer, the doors slid open, and Ceres and Tyra entered, both dressed in regal attire. Their expressions were serious. "It's time," Zyra said simply. Adrian took a deep breath and nodded. "What's the plan?" Ceres stepped forward. "Father will introduce you in the grand hall. Many of our people are already gathered. Some will welcome you, but others—" She hesitated. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Others will hate me." Zyra's jaw tightened. "Not hate, but they will question you. They will challenge your right to be here." Adrian ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I figured. Any advice?" Ceres crossed her arms. "Do not look weak. Do not let them intimidate you." Zyra nodded. "And most importantly, speak from your heart. If you are to win them over, they must see you as more than an outsider." Adrian exhaled. "No pressure, huh?" Zyra smirked. "You'll be fine." Ceres glanced between them before stepping toward the door. "Let's go." The grand hall was unlike anything Adrian had ever seen. It was vast, with towering pillars and a high ceiling that seemed to glow with shifting colors. Thousands of people stood in organized rows, their gazes fixed on the grand platform where the king stood. The air was thick with tension. Adrian walked beside Xera and Ceres, every step echoing in the silent hall. The moment he stepped onto the platform, whispers erupted through the crowd. The king raised a hand, and the murmuring ceased. His deep voice echoed across the chamber. "My people, you know why we are gathered here." He gestured toward Adrian. "This human has been chosen by my daughter. He has faced the trials and earned his place among us." Some in the crowd nodded in approval. Others remained stiff, their expressions unreadable. Then, a voice rang out from the gathering. "Why should we accept him?" Adrian turned to see a tall, armored figure step forward. His piercing gaze locked onto Adrian. "He is not one of us," the man continued. "His kind is weak. Why should he stand among our people?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Adrian swallowed. He knew this moment would come. Zyra stepped forward. "Adrian has proven his strength." But the man interrupted. "Strength is more than trials. Strength is earning the people's trust." The king watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Zyra glanced at Adrian. She could speak for him, but this wasn't her fight. This was his. Adrian stepped forward. "You're right," he said, his voice firm. "I haven't earned your trust. I know that." The crowd fell silent again. Adrian took a breath. "I didn't come here to take anything from you. I didn't ask for this, but I'm here now. And if I have to prove myself every day for the rest of my life, I will." He scanned the faces before him. "I don't expect you to believe in me yet, but I won't run. I'll fight for my place here, just like any of you would." A heavy silence followed. Then, slowly, a few voices murmured in approval. Others still looked unconvinced, but something had shifted. The armored man studied Adrian for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "We shall see if your words hold true." The king finally spoke. "Then it is settled." He turned to Adrian. "Your path will not be easy, but today you have taken the first step." Adrian let out a breath. He had survived the first test. But this was only the beginning. The palace felt different now. The tension in the air had not fully faded, but something had changed. Adrian could feel it as he walked through the halls, escorted by Ceres and Tyra. The stares from the palace staff and guards weren't as cold as before. Some were still cautious, but others nodded in acknowledgement. It was a small victory. Adrian exhaled, shaking his head. Well, that could have gone worse. Ceres smirked. You handled yourself well. Zyra glanced at him, amused. We expected you to stumble at least once. Adrian chuckled, glad I exceeded expectations. But deep down, he knew this was only the start of a much larger battle. Winning the approval of a few wouldn't be enough. He had to prove himself to the entire kingdom. As they neared the garden courtyard, the warm glow of the twin suns bathed everything in golden light. The soft hum of distant waterfalls filled the air, bringing a strange sense of peace. Adrian took a deep breath. So, what happens now? Ceres crossed her arms. You've been accepted, barely, but you are still an outsider in their eyes. Zyra nodded. If you want to truly belong, you'll need to show them that you're more than just words. Adrian frowned. And how do I do that? Ceres and Sarah exchanged a look before Ceres finally spoke. There is a war coming. Adrian tensed. War? Zyra nodded. Our kingdom has enemies. There are those who see my father's rule as weak. They will come for our home. Ceres stepped closer, and when they do, you will have the chance to prove yourself. Adrian exhaled. He had trained, faced trials, and endured the challenges set before him. But a war was something entirely different. He turned to them. And if I fail? Ceres' eyes held steady. Then you die. Adrian chuckled dryly. Great, no pressure. Zyra placed a hand on his shoulder. You won't be alone in this. He looked at her, feeling the warmth of her touch. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe her words, but doubt still lingered. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian trained harder than ever before. The palace grounds became his battlefield. He sparred against the best warriors in the kingdom, pushing himself beyond his limits. At first, the alien soldiers doubted him. Some openly mocked him. But as time passed, the laughter faded. He adapted. He learned their techniques. He fought, fell, and got back up again. His body ached every night, but he refused to give up. And slowly, respect began to replace doubt. Ceres and Zyra watched his progress closely. They trained with him, tested him, and challenged him to be more than just a warrior, to be a leader. Then, one evening, as Adrian stood in the courtyard, drenched in sweat after another brutal training session, a royal messenger arrived. The king summons you, the messenger announced. Adrian wiped his forehead. Now. The messenger nodded. It is urgent. Adrian exchanged a glance with Ceres and Zyra before following the messenger to the grand hall. The king stood before a massive holographic map. His advisors gathered around him. When Adrian entered, the king turned to face him. The enemy moves toward our borders, he announced. Their forces are stronger than before. They will not stop until we are destroyed. Adrian clenched his fists. Then we fight. The king studied him for a long moment before nodding. Yes, and you will stand beside my daughters in battle. A murmur spread through the room. Some advisors looked shocked, others seemed uncertain. But the king raised a hand, silencing them. This war will decide the future of our kingdom, he continued, and I believe Adrian has already begun shaping that future. Adrian met the king's gaze. There was no turning back now. The time had come to prove himself, not just with words, but with action. As he stood between Ceres and Zyra, he felt something shift inside him. He was no longer just an outsider. He was ready to fight for this kingdom. For them. For his new home. And nothing would stop him.